Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. Father Alex here, the host of this podcast. I'm also the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley, and I am the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos the Altar Priest Story, which is available in all good bookshops and online. My guest on the Godcast today is Paul Bayes. Paul is a retired deacon, priest, bishop. He was formerly the Bishop of Hertford, and he was also, more lastly, the Bishop of Liverpool. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you do, then do check out many others online. Hundreds of interviews now on the Godcast, many from the world of faith and church, but also celebrities, writers, authors, sports people, celebrities, you name it. There really is something for everybody. But for now, I do really hope you enjoy this interview with Paul Bayes. Well, I am delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Paul Bayes, and Paul is more latterly known as the former Bishop of Liverpool. Paul, it's really wonderful to get you on the Godcast. How do we find you today?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you very much, Alex. Yeah, enjoying the summer.
Yeah, Paul, I don't know if you remember me. I met you. I've only met you a couple of times. The first time I met you was at Durham Cathedral. It was an event hosted by the Northern Province. I was newly ordained, and there was a service, and I sat next to you. I had no idea who you were. I had no idea that you were the Bishop of Liverpool, but you left a mark on me. I thought, well, that was a very nice, kind, generous man, and I've followed you with interest ever since. And I wanted to ask you earlier in the year, but unfortunately, you suffered the bereavement of your beloved wife,
I'm afraid
Kate.
so.
I just pastorally want to ask you how you are. How's things?
Yeah, it's difficult. We were married for 48 years, and if when I'm talking about her, Alex, I well up there, then that would be entirely normal. I have three children, and we're leaning on each other. We're looking after each other, and but any bereavement is difficult. I wrote something about it, and I said it was in no way unusual. Loads of people lose loved ones. It was in no way unusual. It was only unique, and that's true for anyone who passes away. So we miss her, and I'm getting used to new routines of life without her as we go on.
Do you think there's sometimes an expectation, Paul, on people who kind of are in the business of death and dying to kind of um, use a broad shoulder approach to it, or do you think it's only right and proper that priests, bishops grieve in the same way that every other people in humanity
Yeah, I
do?
hope it is. I mean, it would be a pity if people's experience of walking alongside the bereaved means that you can't walk alongside yourself, or that other people aren't allowed in to walk alongside you. I did lots and lots of funerals in my working life as a vicar before I got into the church's bureaucracy and then the Episcopal order. I did loads of them, and each one I used to give great advice, and now I remember why I gave it, and it hits you every morning. In my case, but partly because it came. We were retired for 6 months before she fell ill, so our plans, which were to have a quite an interesting and a rich early retirement together, those plans fell apart. But for the last year, I was accompanying her to the hospital and for her chemotherapy and so on. She died of a heart attack, but it's a complication of cancer. And it was very good. We went there 2 or 3 times a week, and the hospital chaplains looked after us, and we were well cared for, enormously well cared for by the NHS. So we were in the same boat as so many people are in this country, and it felt that we were looked after and loved, which is really good news for me.
Yeah, you said that you offered lots of advice, so I presume you call on the advice that you gave to others yourself, and
Yeah, I
um,
mean, I used to say to people, it's really going to hit you after the funeral's over, and when everything's died down, that's when it really gets you. And I woke up a few times after that time and burst into tears here in the house, and And then I remembered myself saying that to so many other people, and I thought, well, I was right. It's encouraging to know
Yeah,
that when it happens to you, it's the same as everybody else. And
yeah,
we've got, in a couple of weeks' time, Alex. So we're talking at the beginning of July. In a couple of weeks' time, my children and I will lay her ashes to rest in the sea off North Cornwall, which has always been a place that meant a lot to us. And in some ways, I'm looking forward to that as a moment of letting her go, really. And it has been painful, and I don't expect it to be any less painful for some months or maybe even years to come.
yeah. Well, I was going to say let's move on to slightly more cheery matters, but I did wonder what it was like for you to leave Liverpool, Paul, as the Bishop of Liverpool. Was there a grieving process in some ways, or were you quite happy to let go? Just to
Yeah,
explain to
I mean,
people.
I've been all over the country in my working life. I started up in the northeast, and then down to London, and then the home counties, and then the south coast, and then I got working for the Archbishops Council. So I was all over the country. But Liverpool is a place I'd visited there to do with work. But like any port, it's not on the way to anywhere unless you're going to the rest of the world. So I didn't know the Liverpool area very well before I became bishop there, and there's very little, apart from visiting friends, there's very little reason to return to it. Um, but I miss the people, and I miss the extraordinary courage and stout-heartedness, especially of people who live in the more deprived areas of the diocese. And I miss the companions that I had in the diocese itself, in the diocesan staff and among the clergy. These are people with whom I shared a great deal of my life, and so I miss them. I'm in touch with a few, but only a few. One of the things it helps to do if you're a retired bishop is keep your nose out. And I'm delighted that my current successor, John Perumbalath, I'm delighted that he's the bishop there now. When Kate passed away, I had a lovely letter from James Jones, my own predecessor as bishop, to say, well, there are three of us now, two ex-bishops and one current bishop of Liverpool. It's quite a club to be in. And I felt borne up by that, by the love of James and by the love of the diocese that sent messages to me. So, I invested my life there. Those investments will never fade away. But on the other hand, I don't feel tempted to return there or to make pronouncements about Liverpool. John is on the case, and so I'm very happy to leave the life of the church in that diocese in the hands of an able guy who's the bishop there now.
And when you reflect on your ministry, Paul, I quickly looked you up on Wikipedia and learned that you started out as a drama student at university. You know, do you sometimes think, wow, what a life that gave me? You know, and what was the thinking originally? Were you hoping to be a budding thespian? What was the
Not
plan?
really. I mean, my dream was to be a theatre director, and I went to university and read drama there and in Birmingham, and um, it was a great it was a great time. Towards the end of those 3 years, my reading drama, I met Kate, so we got married when I'd graduated, but she was still a student there. Um, but also towards the end of that time, we did a course. The drama department did a course together with the theology department about ritual and drama and the roots of drama in Greek religious ritual, and that meant that I met a couple of professors of theology, and I was hugely impressed with these guys. I mean, they had the brains the size of planets, but they didn't. They really wanted to enter into the lives of the students they were teaching. So when sometimes people say, well, the academic theologians, they just undermine religion. I always say, well, actually, I was converted by two professors of theology, and that it kind of meant a lot to me that they were there, and because of their example, when I left and graduated, I decided it's not that I fell out of love with the theatre, but I decided that I could make more of a difference if I entered into the church's ministry as a stipend minister, and so that's what I went for.
Yeah, and uh, a friend of yours, Stephen Cottrell, has been on the Godcast, and he said that said to me that quite often he missed being a vicar. Did you miss being a vicar when you were a bishop?
I think what you miss is getting alongside people for the long haul, walking alongside them through different aspects of their life. That was one of the things that when my vocation was developing, I thought actually, as a parish priest, you can be alongside people in the joy and in the sorrow of their lives, and that's really, really marvelous. As a bishop, you get around a lot, and you can touch people's lives quite profoundly, but normally only briefly, and that is both a good thing in a way, but what I missed as a parish priest was just that opportunity to walk alongside people for the long haul.
Yeah. And one of the other reasons that I admire you, Paul, as somebody who is representing inclusive church is the way you've spoken in the past over matters of inclusion and supporting LGBTQI plus community. And I know that Synod's just a few days away, and it'd be very easy to try and manipulate you to throw an incendiary device into the discussion, and which I know you wouldn't do anyway. But what is your kind of feeling about it now as this journey has moved on since you were the Bishop of Liverpool? What's your assessment of things, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations in the church are always ongoing, and in any thorny conversation, same thing happened over the long conversations over the ordination of women to the priesthood and then to the episcopate. You will find people who will say, "Well, we can't really make our minds up yet because we haven't done enough theology," and I'm hearing those voices again now. Let's please not make our minds up because we haven't done enough theology, and my I have to say that I'm impatient. That argument makes me impatient because who pays the price while we're getting around to doing enough theology? And the answer is it's those on the edge of things. And the reason I tried to speak out for those whose lives are made difficult by the church is because I think that's what Jesus did. He didn't have anything to say about the LGBTI plus question, but he did not want people to be excluded, and so to stand alongside that community. When I was in Liverpool, I tried also to stand alongside the marginal communities there. The sense that Liverpool people have that the country is facing the other way from the way they are. And just as a rule of thumb, always to try and get alongside those who've been left out. And I came to believe that as they say, love is love, and that the expression of love for people of people to one another is a God-given thing, and that the church's rules are not blessing people or helping people. So I tried to speak out about that. But at the same time, I tried to say, the church is a complicated outfit, and I want, as a bishop in Liverpool, I want to be here for everyone. So some people accepted that, and some people didn't. But my, all I could do was to say that that's what I wanted to do. But I'm not ashamed of having stood up for that particular community. If you look over my shoulder on this show, you'll see a star, a gold star, attached to a piece of wood, and that is the Liverpool Civic Region Pride Foundation Award, which I was given after I left, and it's one of the most profound gifts that I've ever received. That community with so much pain as a result of what the church has done should find it in its heart to give that to me. I was very moved by that.
Quite rightly so, and I think I'm really pleased to hear you say you're not ashamed, you're proud of what you've done and what you've said. What can I ask a question, Paul? What do you think is the underlying issue here? I think we hold the similar view where I want to bless, I want to marry same-sex attracted couples. I don't want anybody who doesn't want to do that to do that. I don't want to put that person under any pressure to do that. And with the the same of divorced couples. People who don't want to do that in good conscience don't have to. And that, to me, that's the way forward for this. But those who hold that view don't want me to do what I want to do. What do you think is the underlying reason behind that? Is it deeper than a doctrinal issue?
I think there's a well, it is a doctrinal issue, but it's not just a doctrinal issue as it hits on sexuality. It's an issue that hits on the nature of the church, and of course there are those who say the purpose of the organizational church is to impose discipline, and that's the only reason that we've got an institutional church, and people should just jolly well get into line. And I find that approach unhelpful. The diversity of the church is substantial and always has been, and in every generation we've disagreed about stuff. I had hoped, and I still hope that there will be an accommodation between people of different views on this. But I'm well aware that there are many with a more conservative position who would not feel able. And when I was in Liverpool, there were a few who would not feel able, for example, to share in worship with me or to receive communion at my hands. And I found that painful, but I also found it puzzling, really. You know, quite often people who believe that sort of stuff put their faith in the traditional pronouncements of the church. And in the 39 articles, there's an article about the unworthiness of the ministers that doesn't hinder the effect of the sacrament. So, you know, the view that says, you know, we will only be with people who are pure, and you're not pure, so we're not going to be with you, didn't feel to me like a particularly traditional view. But those power games, you know, on the General Synod, some people join the Synod so that they can exercise power. Some people, like the diocesan bishops of England, are stuck on there. But others just want to get on there so that they can hear the sound of their own voice in a public forum. Not everybody, but some. And I regret that. I regret the approximation of our General Synod to Parliament. There's a lot to be said for democracy, but the downside of a parliamentary system is evident in Westminster, as we'll find out later this week when we all vote, and it's increasingly evident in the life of the Synod. And I hope, therefore, that in the Synod, people will be able to pray together, genuinely to pray together, before they take counsel together, and that we'll be able to live up to what we keep promising is the truth, which is that we are one body in Christ.
Yes, I would like that as well. I'm not hopeful, to be honest. Somebody who sits on General Synod, the drums are beating, the daggers are drawn, and it's kind of it's increasingly more difficult. Do you think that the church has to do this, or do you think it can survive if it doesn't?
If it doesn't what, tear itself apart legislatively? Well, I mean, yeah, in a sense, that's what we've always done, and the I mean, there is, I think, a growing sense in the church there's a growing sense among some in the church that the point about the church is to be very, very different from the surrounding culture. That it's our job to stand up for things that are eternal, and of course I believe that's true. But it's just a question of what counts as those particular things, and I you know, a lot of people got in touch with me. I was greatly encouraged when I made the statements that I did as a working bishop, that people got in touch with me who were not church people. I did get many contributions from members of the General Synod, but they were normally not very positive. But the positive ones tended to come from people who'd either left the church or they were hanging on to the church by their fingernails. In the belief that what they were and who they loved was something that Jesus didn't want, and that they themselves were people that Jesus didn't want. And they wrote to me to say, thank you for giving us a breath of hope. And that encouraged me in the stand that I took. And I hope and pray that more of the leaders of the church will find a voice. There's a feeling about bishops that you should kind of, when you become a bishop, you should enter a kind of vacuum of opinion, that nobody should know what you think about anything. And I honor those of my sisters and brothers who spoke out for a conservative position, just as I honor those who speak out for a progressive position, because speaking out is not an unchristian thing to do. And I regret that if there are bishops around now, or indeed senior leaders of other kinds in the church, and nobody knows what they think, because they want to be all things to all people, I regret that. St. Paul said that he wanted to do that so that he may, by all means, save some. He did it for a purpose, not just to spend a lifetime being a kind of projection screen. So it is painful when you're sitting in the General Synod and people are disagreeing, but it is possible to do that without being disagreeable, although there are examples of people who are profoundly disagreeable when they do it. But it is possible to disagree without being disagreeable. And that is, to me, is the image of the church. It's not the image of people trying to find some middle way that doesn't satisfy anybody, but that everybody can kind of grudgingly agree to. That's not the way that I see Jesus working in the scriptures, and it's not the way I think the church should be working.
Yeah, I think that's really wise words, Paul. I think I think some people get frustrated by a wall of silence, but I'm very grateful to people like the Bishop of Newcastle, Helen and Hartley, and Anderson Jeremiah, the new Bishop of Edmonton, who've both appeared on the Godcast and have spoke openly about their support for a more inclusive church. Paul, if I could just move on to something else that resonates with me, and you being a bishop who's worked very closely to struggling communities in Liverpool, is this what I feel is a need to kind of attract the working classes back to church, and the opportunities there. We work in a very deprived area of Burnley on urban estates, and we've been engaging with some diocesan-led what are called ALM courses, and these people demonstrate to me on a daily basis, Paul, what talent they've got, what maybe skills they haven't realized that they have, what opportunities they present to us, to a church, what gifts they can give to us. I just wondered if you would say a little bit about. I've raised a private members bill for the Church of England to have a clear, defined strategy for vocations for people from the working classes. I just wondered if you might offer a few words of wisdom on your thoughts on that, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, all strength to your arm, Alex, in that, and if that is your intention, and to your own bishop, Philip, who's a guy who clearly has this on his heart, and I agree with those people. In Liverpool, we stood on giants' shoulders in the sense that we had some really monumental priests of previous generations. Some of them still alive. I'm thinking of Canon Neville Black, who was just fantastic. He used to come to see me when I used to ask him to come every 6 or 8 weeks, because I said to him, Neville, you're the only one around here who tell me the truth, because you've got nothing to lose. You'd been retired for years. But in his working life, he had tried to establish ways of equipping and shaping ministers who didn't have the normal 3 A levels and 4 degrees, in the belief that actually God wants to touch everyone. And in the same way that we talked earlier about the LGBTI community, it's true of a whole range of people, working class people, that they feel excluded from the church, not because of any intention, but because there's just nobody at the front of church like them. And certainly in my own training, I was trained in the 1970s, and it seemed to be that it was cool to be working class, provided that you were prepared to lift yourself out of that class to go to go to a theological college where you could learn words and language and ways of using language which were incomprehensible to the people that you came from. And the definition of success was that you could do that. And a lot of people did that and then found it impossible to reconnect. And I think that's really unfortunate. You know, some of the heroes of the Church of England who managed to connect with working class people. For example, the movement, the Catholic revival movement, you know, all these eccentric Anglo-Catholic priests in East London who were profoundly suspected by the relevant authorities, but who really got alongside people in their own area. That kind of slightly maverick understanding of what it is to be an incarnational priest is all over the church. You represent it, Alex, in your own ministry. I'm connected a bit still with the Queen's Foundation in Birmingham, which is where I trained, and Birmingham's got a handful of priests who are like that, and I think there's always been, God has not left himself without a witness in those communities. But the risk is that the church will try to professionalize itself in its own anxiety. Oh my goodness, you know, there'll be nobody here by next Wednesday. We'd better learn more long words. I don't see the connection between those two things. Some provinces in the Anglican Communion now insist that if someone is to be ordained, they have to have not one but 2 degrees. And I deplore that way of thinking and would very much wish strength to your arm and to the arm of all those who want to find ways of equipping God's people that don't necessarily involve the command of a whole bunch of abstract nouns.
That's really helpful, and I appreciate it. And you know, I don't know, I'm just a parish. I shouldn't undermine that, but I'm a parish vicar who would love to see an apprenticeship scheme for ordinands and people exploring vocations in the church for the plumbers. And the history of the church tells us that can work. You know, that there is something for everybody. And I also want to ask you about the church and its engagement with the current cost of living crisis. Paul, you talked there about getting alongside people. And in my experience, when you do get alongside people, you really do learn about them and their suffering. Where do you see the lines for the church engaging with the current crisis? I mean, you know, I've come to a place now, Paul, where I'm fed up of celebrating food banks, for example. I think the time to keep celebrating food banks is ended, or it should be ended, and the challenge should be back on the state to provide for the thousands of people in my context and in the context of Liverpool and Birmingham and Blackpool and every urban place in the land. But I also think we have a responsibility to speak out. And I think that by speaking out, I think we can welcome people into the church who then learn to trust us again, who learn to find us as a safe space. I don't really know what I'm asking you here, Paul, but I think I'm asking you, do you agree with me? And do you think this is where we will see the regeneration, not just of the communities, but of the church in these places?
Yeah, I think people. I mean, in Liverpool, I used to say about food banks, you know, it's a tragedy and it's a scandal, and quite often people think, well, we'll just stop at the tragedy, you know, we'll buy some tins of baked beans, the equivalent of Band-Aid, and sort of stick it on people in their hunger. And there were groups of people in Liverpool. I mean, you know, there were many food banks in Liverpool, and people needed to invest in those, or people just wouldn't get enough to eat. But at the same time, there were groups who were wanting to empower people, and there were also groups who were prepared to agitate, and not just church groups, who were prepared to agitate politically and to say, if we want, you know, the famous phrase of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, you know, it's not enough to pull people out of the river. It's better off going upstream and find out who's pushing them in. And the sense in which there are structural reasons for the poverty that we see around us is a sense that needs to be regained. And a great deal of there is a great deal of resource, theological resource, most of it from the global south, about that and about what it is to be liberated. And I think that needs to be needs to be brought forward in the understanding of the church. Having said that, I don't think that we should give up on feeding the poor, because it helps that people should stay alive until we've worked out how to liberate them. So the risk always is that the urgent will drown out the important, and that people will just rush around and there are some. I remember when I first began as a bishop, or fairly shortly afterwards, we had the big society, David Cameron's big idea, the big society. And I remember Jacob Rees-Mogg, hopefully a blessed memory, I remember Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, what a marvelous thing it is that in this country we're so loving and caring towards these poor benighted people that we have food banks for them, as if the exercise of compassion exempts you from having to ask political and structural questions. And in Liverpool, we had a slogan. I think they've still got it. We want to ask God for a bigger church to make a bigger difference. And then we used to say more people knowing Jesus and more justice in the world. And to agitate for justice is not always to be popular. And the present Archbishop of Canterbury, whose own background is quite a privileged background, but he has courageously spoken out about that on a number of occasions. And of course, he gets no thanks for it among some political leaders. But I think the church is compelled to take a stand. I mean, we talked earlier about how refreshing it is when people take a stand, even if it means they have to disagree, and that the church should take a stand on this matter and say, for example, about the taxation burden. Is it actually the case that we're always going to vote for the people who lower our taxes? Wouldn't it be better if we voted for the people who help the poor, even if that means we have to pay more in taxes? Things like that, I think, is important for the church to say, and I hope that it'll continue to say it.
Yeah, it's fascinating listening to you, Paul, and we've had some interesting conversations with my clergy colleagues at St Matthew's. We've we fed the poor, and we continue to do that. And I don't say that to kind of showboat, but I want to kind of perhaps finish this, Paul, with there comes a point, doesn't it, where, like you alluded to the great Desmond Tutu, you have to go upstream sometimes, and we're exploring and thinking about, well, we've done that, but how do we bring Jesus into this? How do we?
Yeah.
Because to us, Jesus is the answer to the problems.
Yeah.
If we can get not just get food into these people, but if we can get Jesus into these people, we can transform them a little bit, and by transforming them a little bit, we can transform the community and the area.
Yeah.
But it's a big job.
Yeah.
But maybe if you could, Paul, with your experience and the amount of respect that you're held in, could you say something encouraging to people that are working in these places about how we go about that and how we inspire people and how we do potentially change communities through the love of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. It always helps. I always found anyway, if you want to help people, to ask them what they want. And in Liverpool, we did some vox pops in Church Street, which is kind of the main shopping street where Marks and Spencers is and stuff like that, to say, what about the church? And we spoke to relatively young people, young parents, for example, and the answer was, we like the fact that the church wants to feed the poor, but we also like the fact that churches are open, so you can go and sit down and be quiet. And the people themselves wanted to hold those two things together. So we used to call it justice and wonder. That actually people want to know that someone's helping them in their situation, in their life situation, not just because they're hungry on a Friday, but they also want to know whether or not there is more to life than what they get. And I'm a works manager's son. My mum was a home help supervisor. So in that context, in Bradford, where I was brought up, there was a church, St. Chance, it's still there, and it was open, or it was a very high church. It was open all day, with a vague smell of incense in there from the previous Sunday. And I would go in and sit down quietly in there and ask God basically which way is up. And those two gifts, that is the gift of identifying with people in their need on the one hand, and the gift of providing space for people to ask their own questions on the other. That combination is something that only the church can do. And frequently vicars such as yourself and such as I was, you spend half your life worrying about the drains and all that stuff. But there is a presence in the community which inheres in these buildings. And since we've got them, let's use them. How do you use them? Well, you can fill them with food, that's great, but you can also just leave them empty so that people can go in there and connect with God. And you can make sure people know that it's okay to do that. And if they do that, that they've got something to read, or if they can't read, something to hold. I spend a lot of my time since Kate died holding this little cross, which one of our bishops here in Bath and Wells gave to Kate in her lifetime, and I just grab it and hold it, and there are people out there who would love to do that if only someone would give them a piece of wood. So that gift, as well as the gift of involvement and justice, those are the two hands, if you like, with which the church can minister in these days. And I would encourage anybody listening to this, to identify which of those two you're not doing much of at the minute and do more of that one.
Well, that's a really encouraging and probably a nice way to end. Thank you so much for coming on. I've thoroughly enjoyed our 35 minutes together. And if anybody else hopefully has enjoyed this as well, do check out the Godcast. There's lots of interviews with theologians, writers, authors, celebrities, singers, pop stars, you name it. There's something for everybody. But Paul Bayes, thank you for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you very much, everybody.